Hello, I'm Tim Eckott, and you're listening to In Conversation on the Voice of Russia from London. Today I'm talking to Camila Batmanghelidjh, perhaps Britain's best-known advocate for child protection. Camila has lived in England since she came here to be educated from Iran at the age of 11 in 1974. Trained in psychotherapy, she now runs the Kids Company, a charity running over 40 drop-in centres for children throughout London. The young people who go there are from severely disadvantaged backgrounds and risk drifting or being forced into a life of crime, drug addiction and all too often prostitution. I asked Camila what first made her realise that there was a need for something like the Kids Company.
I trained as a psychotherapist and then very quickly realised that the children who were being brought to my clinics were not children who needed therapy alone. They needed reparenting because the primary crisis in their lives was lack of love and someone to care for them appropriately. So I wanted to create a clinical model that would give children what they really needed, that reparenting, if the biological carer wasn't able to care for them appropriately. And I think together the children, the workers of Kids Company have managed to create something that really suits the most disturbed and emotionally turbulent children.
Who are these children?
They are predominantly children of drug addicts, children of parents who themselves have been sexually and physically abused. So they really struggle to keep themselves together and integrated, and they can't really think consistently about the needs of their own children. The parent and the child often compete for survival in the same house, and sometimes the child becomes the carer for the parent. And what happens is they therefore tend to be economically enormously disadvantaged as well because the parents can't sustain employment. And very quickly, the children and the parents get dragged into the criminal network. So you get now 8 and 9-year-olds running as drug couriers between dealers. You get child prostitution. I mean, people don't realize, but the average age at which prostitution starts in Britain for girls is 12. And this is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. But it's also, out of 21 wealthiest countries in the world, bottom of the league of 21 countries for the well-being of children. So that's the model, really.
You're now running over 40 centres throughout London where children from these broken homes, disadvantaged backgrounds, whatever you like to call them, come for assistance. How do the children find you?
The fascinating thing is that I have never printed a single leaflet or advertised. Disadvantaged children, or quite a lot of them, know each other. And they have a sensitivity towards other children in crisis. So the typical arrival at Kids Company is a child who maybe has been picked up by one of our own children at a bus stop, is hungry, or on an estate is having crisis, or in our programs in schools, even children as young as 5, 6 will bring another child and say to us things like, Camila, his dad is always drinking too much, And because children know these things, they won't give you a referral file, but they'll give you the core of the story. And that's been our financial problem, because 97% of children self-refer. The state doesn't recognize a child who asks for help directly. So there's no financial model following these children. So I'm entirely reliant on fundraising to support these programs.
But the kind of background you've described that many of these children are coming from, one assumes that they are families or children who are already under some kind of social care. Is that not the case?
No, what happens in Britain is very interesting. About 640,000 children a year are referred to child protection services because someone's worried about them. About 400,000 receive an assessment. And then these children are divided into children who don't get help at all, a small group become what's called children in need, and it's dependent entirely on the social work department, whether they get help or not and what that looks like. It could be that they get to join a club, or someone comes and does 2 sessions of counselling with them or whatever. Out of the 640,000, just under 49,000 end up on the child protection register. And
you think that's too low a figure?
Too low. Absolutely too low. And there is pressure on social workers to get these children off the register as quickly as possible. Because once they're on this register, the social work department has to provide a consistent quality intervention for them and report back on it. Most social work departments don't have the money.
But that's you're talking about fewer than 10% of the children that probably need help.
Absolutely.
Are getting it.
Absolutely. So we are in a country where we've got 49,000 children on the child protection register, only 60,000 children in care. And then in between is probably about 1.5 to 2 million children who are surviving their childhood, and no one is really delivering robust care to them. Politicians know this about vulnerable children, but they don't do anything about it because these kids don't vote. And that's the bottom line.
Is it really as cynical as that? I mean, is it a lack of resources? Is it a lack of expertise that's playing a part?
It's absolutely lack of mindfulness. It's people in decision-making spaces never really thinking about the life of a vulnerable child. And if you want the evidence for this, look at the narrative of the political parties leading up to the election. Not one of them in any of the public debates, in the literature, in interviews, talked about child abuse or child mental health. Children are always referred to as if it's a waiting room for adulthood and everyone's just thinking about skilling them up in education. But they don't talk about vulnerable children in this country.
Well, I think that there is the assumption on the part of the general public, if you like, or if there is such a thing, or people who come from a more functional background, that it's the parents' job. Somebody needs to be looking after these kids, bringing them up the right way, and the state should only interfere in extremis.
Absolutely, the biological carer, the parent, is the ideal person to take care of the child. But there's also truth that some biological carers can't do that job. And it's no point turning a blind eye to it, because what happens is disturbed children then go on to disturb their own children. And in fact, we're carrying out brain research at Kids Company in partnership with UCL, Cambridge, and a number of major organizations. And what we found is that abuse, neglect, and chronic failure to cherish and look after your child leads to significant alterations in brain structure and functioning, which makes the child have greater difficulties in sustaining pro-social behavior. You know, children who haven't been nurtured struggle to control their own emotions and their own energy. And that has repercussions because they grow into adults who can't obey their bosses, who can't get themselves together to do a job properly, who can't manage their own reactions appropriately in a group setting. So in fact, I would say it's not climate change that this country should be worrying about. It's actually the time bomb of children who are kind of getting depleted in an emotional rot.
What you're describing is a very worrying situation. It seems to be a fundamental crack in our society that's not being addressed.
You see, this is the problem with rich countries. Developing countries have informal childcare structures. So let's say the chief of the village, the other women, the other men, all muck in to take care of the child. It hasn't been professionalized. So if there happens to be a disturbed parent, then other people initiate the resilience for that child.
We've lost the family structure.
Well, in Britain, we've lost the family structure. we've shut down informal childcare networks by pledging to professionalize childcare. We're saying anyone who takes care of children should be police checked, but neither have we gone on like Scandinavian countries and really funded professional childcare properly. So British childcare has fallen into a chasm where it neither has the informal network of care nor the formal network of care robustly intervening in the lives of children. And I think it's for that reason that Britain is actually not doing well with child mental health and, the protection of vulnerable children.
Famously, people have said since Victorian times that the British were more interested in their dogs and with animals than they were with children. That's obviously a slightly flippant thing to say, but do you see evidence of it?
Not so flippant. The donkey sanctuary has got massive reserves, and we as a children's charity are completely struggling to make it to the end of the year. So it isn't so flippant. And I think there is something about the British psyche that struggles with vulnerability. And that's why I think they struggle with loving and cherishing children. The British survive by often hiding their sensitivities. And this is not a criticism, it's a defense mechanism. But it's a defense mechanism that's getting politically acted out, and it's betraying vulnerable children. And I think people need to become aware of it and do something about it.
But that's at the society and the institutional level. We're constantly being bombarded, it seems, in the last year or so, particularly in the media, by stories about human trafficking, sexual abuse, abuse of children, dysfunctional families, you name it. Those things are very much in the media spotlight. Why are we still ignoring this vast underworld, underclass that you're describing just in London?
I think we ignore it because the media tends to describe dramatic stories. But the media is not so good at having discussions about systemic change. And in fact, the media is looking for the story to embellish, develop, and so on. So when it gets to serious discussions of what do we need to do to change the fact that large numbers of children are surviving their childhood in Britain and really struggling, no one wants to enter that debate. But in fact, what we need is an independent inquiry. So all these workers in social services, mental health, and so on can tell the truth about how dysfunctional their agencies have become, so that then we can lay down a 15-year plan for vulnerable children's well-being that all political parties sign up to, and it becomes a national vision. But the point is, often it's the failing ministers that get the vulnerable children's brief. It's never really the really powerful charismatic ministers who are given that kind of brief. And because of that, it's always brushed under the carpet. Even, political interviewers never ask politicians, what are you doing about the fact that large numbers of children are being abused? We've got unbelievable number of runaways.
Are social services failing children by and large here?
Social services have amazing workers in them. The system is failing the workers and it's failing the children.
You think the workers are aware of the shortfalls and the failings in the system?
Absolutely. Workers come, heads of children's services, heads of major units of the NHS that deal with child mental health are coming to my office and off the record having conversations about the fact that they can't tell the truth about how bad the situation is because they're afraid of losing their jobs. I remember head of a mental health provision saying, Camilla, I'm an economic slave. I have 2 daughters and a wife and a mortgage. I cannot speak up, but I'm behaving against my Hippocratic oath. If the door was genuinely opened and these professionals could really speak, I think the public would be absolutely shocked by what they would reveal.
But who's behind that culture of secrecy? Who are they afraid of?
They're afraid of what happens is that there is this culture that's developed where you're supposed to be seen to do a really good job, okay? So when Ofsted inspections come and inspect the social work department, they're inspecting what's got in through the doors of social services. There's absolutely no inspection network going to find or seek the children who've been left outside the doors of social services. So statistically, all our data on vulnerable children is flawed because it's based on what's got into the agencies. And then what happens is these agencies can't admit that they're not coping because they're afraid of losing funding. So they go to central government, and head of a PCT said to me, Camilla, don't think that we tell the government the truth. We tell them what they want to hear. They're happy. We're happy. And we'll walk out of that office. And it's that culture of everyone being invested in saying it as everyone wants to hear it, not allowing the truth to be revealed, that is sustaining the difficulty we're having in these agencies.
But what's behind that? I mean, can you fix that with money?
You have to have a vision for children, vulnerable children. Believe me, it's not shortage of money that's the cause of the problem. It's a cultural disease of actually shoving this issue under the carpet, not prioritizing vulnerable children, not having visionary aspirations on their behalf, and not feeling that you're accountable because these kids don't vote. And ultimately, if you're a politician and you've got a lot to deal with, this is the last thing you need to deal with because no one's going to hold you accountable.
These are very powerful and shocking allegations. Who do you blame?
I don't want to blame. I want to describe the vacuum of power that is leading, us down a path of sustaining a dysfunctional system. Every so often, we have children die. There was a child here called Victoria Climbier who died at the hands of her relatives. There was baby Peter who died at the hands of...
And social services were blamed by many people for
individual
those deaths.
Workers get blamed, and that is what's wrong. Because actually those departments are barely managing. And by scapegoating an individual worker and describing that worker as the flawed individual, what we don't then do is look at the systemic situation that leads to these crises in these social work departments. And the two I named were the ones that came to public attention. Every day there is a child who is being dramatically betrayed by the system. I don't want to blame individuals.
Your profile is relatively high for a child advocate in this country. You are regularly on the media. You famously meet people like the Prince of Wales, senior politicians. How do they respond to the kinds of things you're saying to me?
Privately, they admit that it's the truth. I had someone very high up in Downing Street, and I don't want to name them, say to me, you told the truth. And the fact is that we know children's social services is not fit for purpose, but none of us want to go near it.
But why? Because surely it's something that the public would support.
The public don't know. The public think that every child who's being harmed in this country, who is deprived, is being helped. The public don't know that our social work departments in poor areas are making decisions about whether to take a child who's been sexually abused or to take a child who's being left without food at home. And I'm telling you now that they make choices that would blow the public's mind if the public knew. I've sat in meetings where they've decided not to help a child because they know this child is slightly older and very soon he or she is going to commit a crime and end up under the youth offending budget rather than the social services budget. I've had professionals come in and tell me that they're now being told not to diagnose mental health difficulties in children so that it becomes a social services budget and not NHS budget.
But that you are saying that, in effect, it is about money and it is about how government spends money.
Did you know that in this country we don't even have the capacity to find out how much we've spent on one child in a local authority? So if you're James and you go to health, education, social care, housing, each time you're counted as a new child with a new cost centre. And what my argument is, we can't even do the economic viability arguments if we can't cost how much we've spent on a vulnerable child in a local authority. We're a nation where we're doing cancer medicine. We're having a space program now, but we can't work out how much a child is costing and what we've done for a particular child in a local authority. That is a lack of mindfulness about children.
We're talking about government policy, the problems within social services, macroeconomics, microeconomics. Tell us a little bit about an example of a child, obviously without naming them, but give us a typical story of something that you think people should know about that they don't know about.
Yeah, I mean, one of the children I hugely admire and have been enormously moved by is a girl I first came across when she was 9. And she used to come into the therapy room in one of the schools we had, play with the toys, but never say anything. But the way she played with the toys, it was like she had such an incredible thirst for these toys and didn't want to be separated from them, but she never spoke. And then the family disappeared. Her and her 3 siblings disappeared out of the school. No one could find them. No one knew where they were. And at age 12, that very child walked on one of the street level centres premises that I was running and asked for me. And she was shouting at the gate, "Where is that Camila? Where is that Camila?" And it's at that point that as a 12-year-old, she told me both her parents were drug addicts. She had had to start in prostitution in order to feed her siblings. For 2 years, they were out of the school system. Not a single professional had gone looking for where they were because they were not being sexually abused or physically battered. Social services wouldn't take the children into care until eventually the girl was actually raped very badly. But the reason I really admire her is because she used to steal food so that she could feed her siblings. And all her siblings used to climb into bed with her. They were all much younger than her. And her mother used to try and burn her hand on the cooker to try and discover where the food was that she'd hidden so that the mother could eat it post a drug frenzy. And it's kids like that who are carers for younger siblings, who negotiate the disturbances of their parents every day, that we owe robust care to. They've got significant emotional post-traumatic stress
disorder. How do you address that? I mean, that's a desperate
you have to
life.
Stay with them.
What do you do to turn that person into an adult who will not repeat that pattern?
It's not 6 weeks of cognitive therapy that is going to turn around a shattered life like this. You have to stay with them and reparent them until they achieve sufficient robustness to be successful. And the girl now is amazing. She has her own flat and she is taking care of other vulnerable children in the neighborhood because she's so sensitive to them and their parents and trying to get them to the point of help, especially parents who are addicted. She's an extraordinary girl. But her 2 older brothers, her 2 brothers and the younger sister are still struggling and they still need that help.
In a large sense, a lot of what you're giving these people is just normal adult contact, isn't it? It's somebody.
Love.
It's love.
Yeah. And this is the challenge. This is, if you want to say what is the next century's challenge, the next century's challenge is to understand the crucial role love plays in the cohesiveness of all our societies. And yet, love is not something that anyone talks about in politics. Yet, it's the thing that makes everyone get up in the morning and want to work hard. And that's the dilemma, really.
And love is famously something that British people are not very good at talking about in public.
I think British people are some of the most emotional, exquisite individuals I've come across. It's just that they are so paralyzed by a sense of personal shame, which makes it so difficult for them to address emotional issues in their political narrative.
What keeps you getting up in the morning?
I am hugely inspired by these children. I admire their courage, their fortitude, their ability to make good from very difficult situations, their humor. And I think I'm very lucky. I'm spending time with such amazing children and young people every day, and seeing the kindness of donors, philanthropists who come through with help. So I live on this planet of enormous compassion and enormous challenge. So I don't need to go to any movies. It's there every day.
That requires a very positive outlook, because you're surrounded by stories of utter desperation and truly horrific stories coming from young people who've presumably done nothing to bring this misfortune on themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm very shocked. One of the pieces of research carried out by one of the universities with us demonstrated that in a cohort of kids they tested, 1 in 5 of them had been shot at and stabbed. We're not in a war-torn country. And, it's interesting that the way the children perceive the situation is that central government is leaving them in the ghettos unprotected to kill each other, and that's because...
And is there a sense outside the ghettos that a lot of people are thinking, well, that is a ghetto problem, it's not my problem, it's not our problem?
You see, this is the foolishness of it, because the riots of a year and a half ago in the summer demonstrates that when a society is systemically imbalanced, everyone pays a price. Because if you have ghettos that grow in fury and dysfunction, eventually they're going to spill that dysfunction into high-functioning areas and impact it. And in fact, the tragedy of this country is that in private schools, now they're teaching children how to be robbed safely. i.e., the assumption is that if you're a child coming from a well-cared-for environment, you are going to be robbed. And therefore, these are the steps you have to take to make that robbery not turn into someone killing you. I mean, how is this acceptable? And, people talk about curing cancer and the incentive and the funding and the departments that are created to create cancer. But is this not another kind of cancer that we should be looking at? And we're completely ignoring, we're so complacent. Why should our well-cared-for 11-year-olds have to become more aggressive to survive their disturbed counterparts in our public spaces? Why should we agree to that?
Do you see an end to your life's work?
I think characters like me come along and, we endeavor to be catalytic. We start something and we get it going a bit. And, then we'll pop off and then someone else will come along and move that agenda forward as well. So I see myself.
But are you winning the battle in your lifetime?
I think that it is changing, i.e. the awareness of people. For example, I was talking about damage to the brain as a result of neglect and lack of love 10 years ago. That's now become much more mainstream narrative. There are people talking about it. There are radio programs, television programs about it. So I feel we're making progress.
But are there fewer children from a damaged background or a damaging environment coming through?
No, I wouldn't be so presumptuous as to say that what I do has had such an impact. I think the numbers are too large, and the next step is a serious political momentum behind the issue of vulnerable children. That's what's needed next.
That was Camila Batmanghelidjh, founder of the Kids Company charity. I'm Tim Eckott, and you've been listening to In Conversation.